basically two ways to understand Scripture. We could, as many people do, take a look at Scripture and look at it literally, like it's a story of literal history, that everything in the Bible is a report of history. Everything that is in the Bible is inerrant, and everything in there is basically describing exactly different events that occurred in history. And then, you have another understanding of Scripture, which would be more of, while there is a lot of historical things in the Bible, there's also a lot of things that are metaphorical, and there are parables in the Scripture. For instance, Jesus used parables all the time when he told stories. Remember the story of the prodigal son. We all know that story. Now, we don't think that the story necessarily occurred historically, but that we get the point of this radical love that the father had for both of his sons. So, when you look at the Bible and you take it all literally, you want to ask the question, what happened? Did that happen? Is that exactly the way there was? Was there one angel or were there two angels? I mean, Jesus appears and he goes through this wall and just magically appears, but then prior to that, he's having baked fish on the shoreline. How does he have this digestive system that could also pass through the walls? And some people hear that and think like, well, how does that all add up if I'm taking it literally? Sometimes that becomes a stumbling block for a lot of people because they think if it's not like all true, then is it even true at all? But if you ask the question, not so much, did it happen exactly the way they're saying it, but rather ask a different question. And you ask the question, what does it mean? What are all these stories? What do they mean? We hear this story this morning. What does it mean? We look at it and you see how they come there. It's interesting too how they're telling the story how Peter and John are running to the tomb, but John outruns Peter. He's got to put in that human element that he was faster than Peter. Peter was just starting Nutrisystem at the time, so it took a little while for him he wasn't as fast. They always got to throw in a little bit. And that's beautiful, right? Because you see that human element. But notice, and understandably so, when they go there, they don't quite get it. Right away, there's like this tomb is empty. Mary's like, have you taken the body? Can you give it back to me? Where is it? I want to take care of the body of Jesus. They don't understand. So one of the things that we could take a look at is when it comes to our faith, faith is something that is a process. It's something that has to be developed. It's not something that happens right away. It's a process of growth. In the story where Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, Martha says to Jesus, raise my brother, because I am the resurrection and life. And she says, yes, Lord, I have come to believe. So the word I have come to believe, it's a process. Our faith is a process. We handed out all those little cards there, fragile, handle with care. Our faith can be fragile. And we have to handle it with care. We have to nurture it. We have to develop it. We have to work on it all the time. It's something that comes as a process and we have to keep developing it. Notice too that when in the story, Mary afterwards, she recognizes that it's Jesus. So there's something here about this resurrected presence, this essence, was recognizable to these people. When people have had a near-death experience, very often they'll talk about how when they go there in this moment of near-death, they actually recognize their husband, their wife, their mother, their father. They actually, people come and they recognize them. Or there's a story of a kid will be, somebody came to him and then he never knew it, and then later on he's looking through a photo album and goes, that's the guy. That's the guy that I saw when I had left my body. That's your grandfather. And he never knew the grandfather. The grandfather had passed away, he never saw him. But then when he saw the picture, he goes, that's the guy. So it's kind of interesting that when you look at this resurrected body, when you look at we're all in our bodies, there is this sense that when we leave our bodies, you are an eternal consciousness. You are never going to cease to be aware of yourself. And that on some level, you're recognizable. You're recognized by other people who have also left their bodies. Wow. That is really powerful. And that when they experienced this resurrected presence, there was this sense that Jesus in this resurrected presence was the same Jesus that they encountered when he was in his ministry. So that the Jesus before the crucifixion was similar and recognizable also in the resurrection. And they had come to know him, but it took place over time. There's another resurrected story called the Road to Emmaus, where the disciples are walking on this road to Emmaus, and they're heartbroken because Jesus had died. Their friend, this guy that they had all their hopes and dreams in, and he died. And see, fragile. You can eat it too. And he says, "What's the matter?" Jesus is this appearing before these disciples. What's wrong? Oh, didn't you hear about this? That Jesus, we loved him and we knew him and he inspired us and he touched our hearts in such a way, and then he was crucified. And they were heartbroken and they were in despair. And this resurrected presence, Jesus, comes to them and says, "Tell me about it. Tell me about it. I want to know. I want to know about your heartache. I want to know where you're hurting. And I want you to tell me about it. You're grieving, you're going through a difficulty, some type of a heartache or a disappointment. The resurrected presence says to you and I, tell me about it. I want to know. I'm interested in it. Talk to me about it. Do you believe that there is this presence that you live with that knows everything about you and knows your heartache and says to you, I want to hear it. I'm ready to listen to you. Tell me about it. And if we do that, we're going to experience a consolation, a comfort, a new strength in our heart, a new way of understanding that we're not alone. I love that story of the road to Emmaus. Tell me about it. You know, we think of resurrection and we think of like, well, there's life after death. Jesus rose from the dead, life after death. Yes. Yes. As wonderful as all of you look this morning, you're all invisible, you are eternal, and you will live forever. Forever. Now, if we can live in that, there's no fear of death. We live with this presence, this divine presence inside of us. We're never alone, and we live where we would live. Imagine if we lived and there was no fear, no worry, no fear. It's almost like, can we even imagine that? Wow. So we have that in terms of like this life after death. But what about this resurrected presence in this experience now, today? It's almost 10:30 on Easter Sunday morning. This is not an event that occurs when we leave our bodies. This is something that happens now. You know, a woman came up to me the other day on Good Friday and said to me, she goes, you know something, I've grown. I'm to the point where I no longer fear God. I see God as a God of absolute love. And I can surrender my heart and my life to this God. And I no longer fear God. And I no longer fear dying. was like, wow, you just made my day. That is awesome. And in that experience, not only did that woman experience a shift, a transformation, a resurrection, I felt it too. I felt so great inside of myself. Eric, you were telling a story on the Lenten series about this neurosurgeon who was an atheist and had experienced some type of bacterial infection and had left his body, and again had this experience of life beyond the body. The colors, the brilliant blue and red, and the warmth and no fear was like, and this overwhelming sense of being loved. And then he comes back into his body, and it's not even about a faith or a belief, it's a knowing. He now lives knowing of this deeper dimension inside of him as a human being that then experienced resurrection. I told the story, my brother told me that my mother, who had Alzheimer's for 4,000 days, 10 years of not knowing who she was, my brother said that she was going to go be put on hospice. So on December 12th, which was a cold, snowy March day, March 12th, I decided I'm going to go down there. She doesn't know who I am, but I'm going to go down there. I remember her telling the story of like, well, she had seen her grandfather, and she was like, well, she doesn't even know who we are. And then her father said, yeah, but he knows who we are. I'll never forget that. I went down there, and I just said to this woman, my mother, I love you. I love you. I am so fortunate that I got to be your son. I gave her a hug. And 2 days later, she left her body. And I remember feeling this tremendous sense of joy and relief that my mother, who for 4,000 days didn't know who she was, and I was absolutely convinced that she had been restored to the vibrancy of who my mother is. And I remember at the funeral, we had a picture of her when she was like 35, and it occurred to me, because she was 91, and she went from 81 to 91 not knowing who she was. And I saw this picture of her when she was 35. And I'm like, that's my mother. She was 28 when she had me, and there she was, 35, 37 years old. And I was like, I got hit with that, like, wow. And I think of the love that she gave to me, and all the different things that she told me. So much, really, probably a lot of my faith actually came from my mother. And I realized in the moment that when I came out of myself and went down there and told this woman how much I loved her, I experienced resurrection. I experienced coming alive in a deeper dimension of myself by acknowledging this beautiful woman who showed up as my mother on the planet Earth. This resurrection. Jesus says to his disciples, go and meet me in Galilee. Why? Why Galilee, the resurrected presence? Why does he say, go back and meet me in Galilee? Why not Capernaum? Why not Bethany? Why not Judea? Why? How come Galilee? Because Galilee is where it all started. Jesus begins his ministry in Galilee. Jesus begins this ministry, and in that ministry, what was central to the message of Jesus was this. The kingdom of heaven is within you. This was the core message of Jesus. This kingdom of heaven is within you. Human beings, there is a dimension inside of you the depth of who you are, the beauty, the majesty, the love, the power that you have inside of you. This is called the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus says you can live in it anytime you want to. But you got to develop it. You got to work on it. You got to recognize this dimension. Goes all the way back to square one. And he commissions all of his disciples. Go and live this message and go tell other people about it to transform the planet Earth. So beautiful. So beautiful, the sacredness and the beauty of a mother with a little boy. He's getting heavier, right? But see, if we could live in this dimension, this kingdom of heaven, we could come out of ourselves and love. We could recognize that you don't live alone, that you have this power inside of you. God raises Jesus from the dead. God says yes to Jesus, yes to this love, yes to Jesus is the way and the truth and the life. He says no to the power and the domination that killed him. And he vindicates and validates Jesus and says yes to the way Jesus lived his life and his vision of life. This dimension that he says inside of each one of us. And if we could live in that, we all would experience what it means to be resurrected.